Hi there, friend. My name is John Werner. I used to be a part of the largest cult in the United States. After studying the Bible, Christian history, and ministry, I set my sights on confronting the problematic nature of white evangelicalism in the United States. In 2019, I published my first book as a first step in addressing the subtle issues of this complex system. This podcast will continue that work under the same title. Welcome to The Cult of Christianity. Content warning. While the Cult of Christianity often deals with tough subjects regarding religious trauma and other triggering topics, some episodes may be more explicit than others. This episode contains content that may be distressing to some listeners. This may include multiple mentions of self-harm, suicide, sexual abuse, or other intense concepts. Please only listen if you are in the headspace to do so. Take care of yourself. On today's show, someone who needs no introduction. You clicked on this as fast as you could when you saw her name. Backed by popular demand, backed by my demands. I asked. It wasn't mean. Lilly! Yay! Welcome back.
Hey girl, hey.
Hey girl, hey. This is something I wanted to mention actually. Can I just say that one of the best things that come out of this podcast is our friendship? Like, it's so funny to think about how we were acquaintances, I would say, before, but ever since the podcast, I feel like I've gotten to know you better, and now we're like semi-besties. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, no, you're allowed to post me on the grid. You're allowed to call me your bestie. I think we're at that stage now.
Okay. All right, cool. I didn't know. It's one of those things where I'm like, man, I know we're besties, but what does that even mean?
Well, John, the listeners don't know about your birthday where you came up and visited for Seattle. So
that's right. Yeah, we got to meet in person. I should say this. Yeah, we got to meet and spent oodles of time together, and it was magical and hilarious and ridiculous.
Just oodles of me yanking your chain and pushing your buttons and making you upset. I had so much fun.
But I would like to think that was somewhat mutual.
No, it was for sure. Yeah, you drove me nuts. It was great.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm very happy always to be talking to you, and it's fun to do a show with you. Yeah,
obviously ditto, but I think it'd be kind of cool to point out that we were hanging out with other folks who've been on the pod, Chris and Sierra and Amelia. So we actually all got to meet and hang out.
Yeah, it was like a launch party after something had launched, or a reunion party before something had ended.
Well, yeah, because Chris and I hadn't seen each other since we were 12 from homeschool co-op.
I should definitely point out to the audience, I know you basically because I lived with Chris. Y'all grew up together.
Yeah, they might. I mean, I think that we've, the others.
I do have to explain that. Me and Lily refer to everyone who isn't me and her as the others.
But that's not. It's because we're so disturbingly similar that we've kind of started just doing this thing where, we'll kind of share a brain almost and be like, oh, I think this is what the others think. Anyway.
I thought you were just going to say that it's because we're disturbing. I thought you were just going to say that.
Well, yeah, there's that too. Has it only been 3 minutes? Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, everyone.
It's been 3 minutes.
I'm really sorry.
Let's watch that clip.
Let's watch that clip. No, yeah, so the back history on our family, I guess, at the pod is Chris Laux and I went to the homeschool co-op that he so graciously talked about together. I went there from the ages of 10 to 13, and honestly, I couldn't tell you how long Chris and his sister were there, but I do remember having classes with them. Chris's mom was my very first writing teacher in 6th grade. That was the same year I had a big crush on Chris. And then we just, went off into the abyss of puberty and adulthood and became friends on Facebook. And you and I ended up talking, I think, while you guys went to school together. And the rest is history, man.
The rest is history. It's history.
History.
Yeah, it's it's yeah, I'm so glad. But seriously, like, I mean, obviously this podcast has been rewarding on emotional levels for me for different reasons. But the other day when I knew you were coming on, I was thinking, I was like, what's really cool is like it really was like a launching pad for like yours and I's friendship. So that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Aw.
It's pretty cool. Give us an update on what you've been up to since last year.
Yeah, I think the last time that I was on was with Rachel and we were talking about us gays, which was lots of fun.
The gays.
The gays, I'm trying to think of where I was. Oh, and then before that I was on with Sierra and Amelia. Okay. I'm just trying to think of like where the heck was I? Because time's not real. Last, I think August or so, July, August, I decided to go back to school. And that kind of came a little bit out of nowhere for me. So I am actually now, I'm finishing out my BA in health counseling and psychology, and I'm going to be applying for the master's program at my school, probably my next spring quarter next year, for the HCP health counseling program. So that's been a little bit of a whirlwind journey, and I applied to a few different schools and wrote a few different entrance essays, but I ended up getting into my first acceptance was from the school that I wanted to go to the most, which I'll name drop it. I don't care. It's Antioch University here in good old beautiful Seattle, and it's one of the most liberal arts schools in the country. So that is definitely a big reason why I chose it, because I am really trying to kind of deconstruct some of the mental health history that I personally have after growing up with the church, and some of the understandings that I had about mental health and trusting yourself and leaning on yourself, or not trusting on yourself and not leaning on yourself. And so it was really important to me to try and approach mental health for other people with as much of a diverse outlook as possible. So that's why I didn't go to a place like SPU, where I could sit very comfortably with the rest of them and just kind of regurgitate stuff that I have already learned.
That's so cool. I'm obviously like really happy for you. I love that for you. And I think that it's something. It's interesting that when a lot of people who would go to study would immediately talk about career, like I want to be this, I want to be that. I find it interesting that you're quick to point out like this is helping me evaluate some of my past, and it's almost more personal. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah, actually, the school that I go to specifically focuses on their students doing a lot of interpersonal work, or I guess introspective work is the word that I was looking for. Interpersonal and introspective, I guess both exist though. But it's really important to, I guess, the school that I have been attending to really do difficult work in looking into your own relationship to topics that are brought up, like quote unquote abnormal psychology, or resiliency, or what do these things mean for you? I mean, I have started wondering if I'm more neurodiverse than I originally thought, because these classes are bringing up really realistic things. I'm working on a really challenging project right now for resiliency for my resilience class, and yeah, I really don't think that I would be doing the work of actually learning if I wasn't applying it to the difficult work in my own life. If I was just learning about mental health from a bystander point of view, rather than just acknowledging that this is something that every single person deals with and struggles with. And it's not in any way an us and them situation of people who are experts and people who struggle. And if you are approaching it in that circumstance, I don't think that you're, in any position to be a counselor, because it's not really a safe space to be in. Did that answer your question?
Boy, did you? Well, no, you did, because you and I have talked enough off air. This is why off
Jeez.
air. To discuss I have my own issues with therapy sessions and the feelings I get there. It's actually really comforting to kind of lift the veil there, I guess, and be like, hey, a lot of people who are going into this field, the way they are trained is to kind of not see themselves as guardians or fixers, but to actually apply certain kinds of science and knowledge to themselves first.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people entering therapy, and I am no exception in this, approach therapy as kind of like a way of being validated or being fixed. And validation is definitely necessary in a lot of cases, and I don't mean to diminish that, but I think that a lot of people kind of approach therapy as this is a person in authority that I'm going to unveil my soul and secrets to, and then they're going to make judgments about me based on what I'm telling them and what that means about me and how broken I am. And that sucks. It sucks that society's kind of put that onto people, when really, I mean, I am intending on being a therapist because I feel like I have the tools and just experience in my own life to sit with people going through things that, other people might not necessarily be there with. I want to be there for that bigger than body rage, because I've had that bigger than body rage too. And I know how scary that can look like to other people that aren't sitting there with you. And holding that space to not diminish or criminalize these things that are coming up is just, it's important. How are we going to talk about painful things and learn from them if we don't first stop criminalizing them?
I wonder how much of your reactions and corrections from Christianity affect that, because to me what I hear is I want to practice empathy, not sympathy, and I feel like in a Christianity a lot of times you're taught how to practice sympathy but not empathy. Does that kind of make sense, where you're trying to feel something with someone and walk them through it having felt it before, instead of here's a perspective and I feel bad for you because you don't have this perspective?
Yeah, no, precisely. I really do hear what you're saying in the whole sympathy empathy regard, and that's precisely why I think it's important to challenge yourself with difficult things, because it's the people aren't different. I mean, it's so frustrating to me to see humans being reduced to and looked at based on product of circumstances, or based on actions that they took, and not looking at a root of something. It's one of the projects I'm working on right now is the presence of mental. All right, let me pull it actually back up again for relevance. I actually have a tab open. The prevalence of mental disorders in incarcerated contact sexual offenders. And I'm trying to do difficult work that is challenging, because I think that when people hear mental disorders in contact sexual offenders, they hear an excuse for action. Like, okay, we're just saying that as long as you have a mental disorder, or some kind of struggle with mental health, then that means that what you're doing is okay. And that's not it at all. But if we don't learn from people, if we don't learn where they come from and how they grew, how their mind grew, and who they are and why they are, why they are the way that they are in this point of their life, we're really not going to be addressing anything. We're just going to be throwing people away with judgment and diagnoses. And what good does that do except for create a barrier of stigmatization? I certainly don't see one.
Truly. Yeah, it's just categorizing and labeling people in kind of a, I don't know, in a very uncomfortable way for me. I think it could lead to something bad. Before we get too much into this, this is something I wrote down just because I was thinking about it. So you don't necessarily have to have like a perfect response to this. But how do you perceive the differences between like mind, consciousness, our physical brains, and then spirituality? Because I feel like all of those can be the same thing and can also be very different. How do you perceive all of that?
Oh, it's such a complicated. Okay, mind differences, our spirituality.
So I said so I was thinking about mind, which is and then consciousness, which whatever that means.
Okay.
Then physical brain, so like more science, like what's happening, and then spirituality, which who the fuck knows.
Sure. Yeah, that's so interesting. I say that's so interesting because as growing up as a Christian, I had such an implemented understanding of the narrator in my head being someone else, being the Holy Spirit. And I had such a understanding of monitoring my thoughts so that I didn't have to feel guilty for them, and like maybe I accidentally thought something that I wasn't supposed to, and that leads to meaning something bad about me. This idea of the voice in my head not being my own was really, really powerful. And I think it was maybe when I was 23 that I finally realized that perhaps maybe all my thoughts aren't being monitored and graded and scaled, and perhaps it's okay for me to approach my thoughts and emotions with curiosity rather than shame and feeling like it's going to affect my eternal life. I don't know. Was that helpful at all for what you asked?
It's certainly getting to like the start of it because Christians get like, they use a lot of terms like spiritual warfare and stuff. So to relate, I didn't necessarily feel like the narrator was the Holy Spirit. I felt like the narrator was my evil flesh, and the Holy Spirit would chime in every now and then. Like that's how it felt to me.
Oh,
and so it felt like there was just this internal struggle, more or less.
I guess that is more what I mean. If you actually, if you break it down a little bit further, I can see what you're talking about. I do actually relate to that as far as just this struggle of your own, if you do kind of practice your own voice, or maybe engage in questioning your thoughts that might be labeled as sinful, then there's kind of this voice that chimes in as far as like, you better not think about that. That's, you need to monitor your thoughts. That was I think sometimes, honestly, I wasn't sure if the badness, if like the bad thoughts and the bad narration that I had, I think I had some confusion as to whether that was me or whether that was those, so to speak, fiery spiritual darts from Satan that we heard growing up.
Right. Well, and Christians will even say, have every thought captive, right, to the word of God or whatever. So like, it feels like, okay, so there's some volition here, but like, yeah, if you take the shit seriously as you and I did, like it really does, it messes with your mind, I tell you, because but yeah, going back to what I was talking about, so that to me, like the mind is almost, I don't know what I think about all this, but I think I break it down like, okay, the mind is your thoughts, the things that you can't scan like in a MRI. And then there's like this consciousness thing that is confusing and I think exists, but we don't really know what it is as far as I can tell. Or maybe someone does, but I don't really understand it. It's something that connects human to human, but is also somewhat distinct human to human. Then you've got physical brains that we can dissect and be like, hey, this part does this part does that. But then you have spirituality where each person kind of gets to make up whatever it works. I mean, and I don't mean that in a reductive sense, but I mean it genuinely. Like, I have my own kind of spirituality. I know you do too, and I know, every individual does. So that's just kind of, it's weird to me because when we talk about mental wellness or mental illness, I'm like, where is the illness only the physical brain stuff, or is there other things going on? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I like that question. That wasn't clear to me at first, but I like it. First of all, like as always, I have just kind of like a million little commentaries, and feel free to cut this out if you feel like it's not helpful. But
Nothing will be cut out.
beautiful, low editing. I like it. Have you seen the movie Cold Souls?
I have
Cold
not.
Souls. Okay. I saw it like as a young teenager, and I think it was probably more impactful for me than I realized at the time. And it's actually probably kind of a strange, silly movie. I haven't watched it since, and I kind of maybe should. But the premise of it is that in this movie, your soul was a physical thing in your body that you could have transplanted just like any other part in your body. And there was this process where, but before they will remove your soul, you have to confront it, though. You have to look at what you are running from, essentially. And a lot of people choose to keep their soul, and a lot of people choose to be someone else because they want a different soul. Then there were also soul traffickers. And it was very interesting. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, maybe it's not important. But I think it was more impactful for me than I really realized, because I started really thinking about what a soul looks like and what that means for me. And then the second little thing that sprung up is I'm actually in the process right now of starting a spiritual group, once a month spiritual group that meets on Zoom. And I've reached out to a few people that I thought might be pretty good fits for it. And I got a response, which obviously is perfectly okay, but I got a response from someone saying that she didn't have a spiritual life, or she didn't think that she would be a good fit. And, I haven't responded yet. Of course, it's fine, but it kind of makes me think how that's possible. I don't have that experience. So I'm curious how that looks for someone, because I have such an understanding as everyone being inherently spiritual in some way, whatever that could mean for them, because I think consent and spirituality is really important. But whatever that means for them, I've looked at people as just inherently spiritual. So when I hear someone that grew up without a spiritual influence saying that they just politely don't have a spiritual life, I'm kind of curious, I guess.
Right, and you wonder how much of that is like left over, and how much like, or not, and not in like a bad way, just like,
Yeah.
well, you grew up a certain way, right? And so like I I've obviously talked to a lot of people who have left Christianity or deconstructed their Christianity to some extent, and it's really common for them to say, yeah, nothing, I'm full on agnostic, full on atheist, don't practice any spirituality. It's pretty common. But I'm always like, is that just like a reaction? Like, are you not curious, like, about the things that you felt at one point, that kind of thing. So I think you and I probably align on that a lot. But yeah, where do you place mental health in all of that? Is there a component of all of those things in there, or is there, like, I don't know, how do you perceive that?
Well, I can certainly speak to how I personally perceive it, but I think it kind of has to be individual to the person, or be specific to the individual, because of what we're talking about, as far as not everyone has a spiritual life, and so maybe their mental health doesn't apply that way. But as far as my perspective is, not only can it be whatever you choose it to be, but I think it depends on how it shows up in your life. Because on one hand, mental illnesses and mental disorders factually, of course, present themselves physically in a lot of people, whether that might be a hormone imbalance. I joke that I take my depression pills every morning, or my happy pills, or whatever it is that I call them. Um, and it depends on how that presents for you. So yeah, it can present physically. Maybe, if you aren't growing your own serotonin, you supplement it elsewhere. But I think that there is a situation where if you have had your spirituality, I think abused is the best word. If you have had your spirituality, you know, abused or misused or violated, then that very likely can be where mental illnesses can pop up, and maybe it can be a reaction to something, or it can be keeping yourself safe, or it can be a way of coping. Um, and then as far as a consciousness, I think that's so open to interpretation. Um, I think that my consciousness is really, really heavily involved in my mental health because I grew up mostly relying on my own internal dialogue. I grew up very, very isolated, homeschooled with usually one caretaker. And I relied a lot on my internal world and my internal dialogue. And so a lot of my mental health came back around to that. Whereas a lot of other folks that I know struggled with mental health from growing up, going to school, and dealing with various circumstances that way. So, yeah, I think it's really going to depend on how your brain developed and how it grew, because I think that our consciousness develops really the same way that our physical brain does. I am aware of and understand my kind of younger consciousness and younger perspective on things, but I've also grown since then, and I can add on more layers and more perspective because I've had more experience.
Mm. On that note, what when you compare yourself, obviously you and I both grew up in the cults. We did a whole episode on how indoctrinated we were. When it comes to like mental wellness and mental illness, if you compare and contrast like the before leaving Christianity to the after leaving Christianity, what do you feel like has changed? What do you feel like hasn't changed? And what do you feel like you're still kind of working on?
Um, yeah, good questions. I'm really thinking back to my very first introduction into psychology and understanding of it, and my very first classes were psychology and sociology at my technical college that I went to for Running Start when I was like 17, probably. And the Christian perspective that I grew up with was that psychology was an excuse for people to sin and to just, be given a reason and an okay to do it. Basically, that it was an example of people examining themselves apart from the Holy Spirit's influence, and leaning on themselves rather than Jesus. And so I kind of had this kind of perspective of like an us and them. Like mental health really is sinful. It gives you another place to go to that isn't Jesus, that isn't looking to Jesus for your guidance and your forgiveness and your acceptance. That if that should be all that you need, right? So if that's not all that you need, then what's wrong with you? If you're still struggling and you're not getting help from God, then well, God doesn't move himself away from you. As scripture tells us, we only move ourselves away from God. So us not getting help must also be our fault, right? So growing up then, having just kind of this circular perspective on my own mental health being my fault because I'm alone with God, and then now just kind of looking at it with more of an open mind, and well, not open mind, I guess just open mind towards myself, really. Just learning about myself is really the way that I think I differentiated the most, because I grew up thinking that it was wrong and sinful and selfish to, be focused on myself and learning about that. But I've noticed that it makes me so much kinder to other people when I understand the kindness and the space that I needed, and the interactions that I really wish that I had had. It's made me learn how other people might need to be handled. And so it's really, I think, moved off of a space of only looking within myself to looking outside towards others.
Wow, so much good stuff you just said there. One, yeah, I'm starting to feel the heaviness of this episode. I don't know about you. It's starting to happen a little bit.
I'm like, John, you said you wanted it.
Yeah, no, I consented to this. Yeah. So first off, I think it's such an important point that curiosity towards yourself is discouraged in the cult, right? Like there's like this vague threat or warning that if you look inward for answers, or even just to like figure out what makes you tick, don't do that. Look to the Bible, look to your pastors to figure out what your story's already been written. Don't you dare go off write your own story. Your story is going to be messed up.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very astute point, because having left the cult myself and like still having, mental illness, but and when just to compare, like in high school, I knew I had depression. Like it doesn't frankly, it doesn't take a psychologist to look at me and be like, oh god, that guy's depressed. But
LOL.
LOL. Lol.
As your friend, I'm just saying LOL.
Yeah. Of course. No, yeah. It takes like a day. You're like, oh god. But and I take a little pride in it, not gonna lie. But when I was in high school, it was this deep, shameful thing. And then in college, it kind of turned into, well, a lot of the best Christians were depressed. Look at C.S. Lewis. He was depressed as fuck, and he was a hero to Christians. And like, or look at Job, and look at these characters in script. So like, I tried to kind of justify it that way. But yeah, the ability for me to be like, oh, here's why I tick this way. Here's some parts I could work on. Here's some parts that wasn't my fault. Even being able to say the phrase, that wasn't my fault, is like revolutionary compared to how I, grew up. And the other thing you mentioned just about like kind of that introspection versus like kind of the inner world, inner dialogue versus the outer world, like how much mental wellness is introspection and how much is getting help from others?
Can you phrase that a little bit differently? Because that sounds a little bit broad.
No. Yeah, let's see. I'll phrase it more like this. If you want to improve your mental health, like, do you think, and obviously it's probably going to depend on individuals, of course, like most of this will. But in your perception, like, how much needs to be like looking at yourself versus like getting advice or help or instruction from other people?
Well, see, that's the thing, John. That's the thing. Sorry, I don't know why I phrased it that way. Just I was kind of picturing us sitting together in armchairs.
Yeah. Someday.
I really just hate the whole categorization of having it be either getting help or either looking into yourself, because it really I think it really should be a matter of having support in your life that helps you grow yourself. Because you really, I don't think that it's healthy to develop the practice of looking towards other people for answers, and looking towards other people for help and solutions. I think that it can be, I think it's really, really important for everyone to have a support system to have to say, hey, here's my thought process on this, and have that person say, well, have you thought about it like this? How, what comes up for you when you think about this person saying that? Well, and just asking questions, like literally just asking someone to think about themselves, just guiding people into learning about themselves and holding that space. But, far be it from me to give advice to someone that I am sitting and talking to for an hour in my future. You know what I mean? I really just want to, make sure that I am, qualified to hold space for someone to learn about themselves. It's not for me to tell someone what to do. And it's not for anyone else's either. I think it's really important to have a community that just assist people in walking themselves through life, because no one else is going to be there with you when you die, in your inner world. Outwardly, hopefully, yes, many people are there with you when you die. But when you are
Not
all
for me. Nah, they're all gonna be like, peace out. I'll send a card.
No, I just mean like when you're by yourself, like at night,
Right.
that's you. So like you can't just be in the practice of always needing someone. You have to develop those muscles within yourself. And if people around you aren't helping you develop those muscles, then they don't really love you.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on it. Yeah. It because of my religious upbringing, my self-centered like awful voice is going off that I'm trying to kill. Because that's real, right? Like you go like, wait, is it selfish for me to view people as a support system? And well, no, because obviously you're supposed to be a support system for them, but you're right. Like truly loving someone is actually caring about their needs and caring about their care for their own needs, not just trying to make them fit onto a grid of correct behavior or anything like that.
I mean, yeah, it's almost as if our relationship should be tailored to the people.
Right. Yes. I'm big on individualization. No two relationships should be exactly the same, in my opinion. Like there's unique bits of everyone. No, that sounds weird. But
I do pride myself in my unique bits.
I have very unique bits. I should probably see a doctor, but yeah. Well, so let me ask this. Like, this is something I obviously have to deal with the podcast, and like both myself and for my audience and the rest. Does like talking about religious stuff ever trigger you?
Yes. Next question. No.
Well, yeah. Can you like samesies? Can you go more into like either what that looks like or why or anything like that?
To be honest with you, the most, even more things. It's interesting because even like things outside of religion will trigger me about religion. Does that make sense?
Say more.
Okay. Because I'm sure that I'm sure our brain understands. Yeah, no, but
yeah, for the sake of the others, go on.
Okay. The thing that has been the most triggering for me the last, I guess 2.5 years now is just noticing a lot of things that I guess we had been warned about in like the end times. And it's not like these things started just a couple of years ago, but a lot of things kind of came to a head because of COVID and there were limitations on other things and what people are doing and other things that we are focusing on and so forth and thereon, etc. But like a lot of the people in my life didn't really understand why I was kind of like, oh, this is really weird how there's an illness going on that's wiping out the whole nation, and there's the civil unrest and danger everywhere, and this is really awful. And it's so annoying because I would kind of go into these different spirals of what if I was wrong, and then if I was wrong, do I still want to stick to my decision? Because I still might. As far as I guess what I mean is, if I was wrong about leaving Christianity, and there is a heaven and a hell, do I still want to stick to having left Christianity? Because I still might want to stick to that decision now that I've had more time outside of the church and I have kind of realized how little I want to follow a leader that was exalted as Christ. I still, would probably stick with that decision. But, it's been really triggering to remember staying in religion out of just fear for my life, literally.
Wow. So interesting, because like this is, you and I talk a lot about how we're the same and how we're different, like comparing and contrasting, because it's fun, because it's like our similars are so strikingly similar and our differences are so strikingly different.
Yeah, that was something I was thinking about, obviously getting ready for the pod, is just kind of how, funny it is that we are so similar in so many ways, and then in so many other ways we just could not be more different, and it's just always fun to see which it's gonna be.
Exactly. That's why we're long lost twins. I'm almost convinced. But and I'm pretty sure I'm the evil one, but you might be. I don't know. But that's that kind of big stuff almost never triggers me. It's little things that will get me in a weird bad mental health spot. Like when, like, just if I see someone who's like, just like if someone's like reporting on social media about something that sad that happens in their life, and then they're like, so glad God's there to comfort me, like that stuff just sends me, like I just like I get mentally crazy over that stuff. But like stuff that looks like end times, or stuff that like looks like the Christians were right, I was like, fuck them, I know they're wrong, so I can just like move on from it and it doesn't bother me. But those little things, they send me.
What I want to learn more. What do you mean by sending you? Do they make you angry?
That's usually the best reaction, honestly. If I get angry, I more just get either depressed or like really it's bitterness more than anger. I'm like so mad that I was like raised the way I was raised, or that like the people it's just because I think what it is I grieve. This is probably self-centered, but I grieve like the times that I went to that instead of actually working on myself, right? Like I'm like, man, I just effed my life up so many times by like trying to do it the Christian way, and because I was scared that exploring myself would lead me away from Christians, I guess, or from Christ, like it almost feels like anger or bitterness or resentment from lost time that I just like wasted. I could have been improving myself. I could have started improving myself a lot earlier. I think that's maybe where it comes from.
Oh, wow, that's really big. Yeah, because that's not what I would have gotten from you saying that it sends you. So I'm glad we're talking more.
Well, obviously, like some of it is just like those Christians, but like that's like the immature. I can move on from that. That's not really triggering. Like, I mean, when I'm like, when it'll mess with me.
Yeah.
Like maybe depressed.
Yeah. For me, what I'm hearing is sadness from you.
Well, yeah. Lily, it's John, your friend. He's sad.
No, I guess what I'm saying is that so many times I think that a lot of people don't sit with anger being a secondary emotion from sadness. or grief being a
At least
secondary emotion.
disappointment, right?
Disappointment, yeah.
I don't know. It's yeah. So religious stuff triggers me, but I obviously know it doesn't trigger me as much as some of my friends. I have really good friends who like cannot listen to my podcast, and that's totally fine with me. Like I don't blame them at all. There's obviously a lot of like triggering religious trauma related stuff that I talk about. But like 9 times out of 10, if I'm talking about Christian stuff, it will not trigger me. But I because that's true, that's part of the reason why I keep doing this. Is I'm like, well, if I can handle this, like I want to talk about this, because I think it needs to be talked about. But it's always just a question I'm curious about, because it reminds me a lot of suicide back in the day. Like obviously I was very suicidal in high school, and like I wanted to talk about it and felt like I couldn't. And so now I'm very big on like, hey, I really don't like when suicide isn't even mentionable. Like that like really bothers me, because I think it must be. Because if it's not mentionable, it's not making it happen less, So that's kind of like it's a similar feeling sometimes for me with religious trauma, where I'm like, hey, like I want you to recover and I want you to be healthy, but we also like gotta talk about this on some level,
Gosh, yeah. I this is the part where we're the same. I really could not agree more. Yeah, I think there's like a Mr. Rogers quote that contains like everything.
Feelings are both mentionable and manageable. I think you and I share this favorite quote. So.
Yeah, well, and he also says everything that is human is mentionable.
So good. We didn't deserve Fred.
I actually wasn't allowed to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because my mom said he was a socialist.
That's why. Can I tell you? He was actually like a minister in the Presbyterian church.
So
like that's wild to me.
So
because I'm like, dude, Presbyterians are. I grew up Presbyterian. They're wild. They're like so dogmatic and reformed. But then Mr. Rogers comes along and is just an actual angel.
Like literally an angel on earth. Nothing bad to say.
Yeah, I full support. Fred Rogers for president. Yikes. But yeah, you were saying that this stuff is mentionable, and it's got to be, right?
It has to be. It's just because if we treat certain things in humanity as being unmentionable, then we treat the people that have these unmentionable thoughts and these unmentionable everyday situations as being shameful and unmentionable. And if someone that is struggling with suicide is viewed as unmentionable, how helpful is that?
Yeah, literally harmful. Harmful.
Yeah, like why are we doing this? Why are we making hurt people ashamed for hurting? Like that's so unproductive. We can't tell people that so many people are dealing with so many problems that you can't talk about. That's just that leaves only some people to feel like they're allowed to speak, but then they're at the risk of being kicked out of that club at any time, right? Because how dare you be like the other strugglers? And it creates again just this us and them mentality, as if only some people have mental illness or mental struggles, and I just don't think that's true. My wild opinion on this podcast for the day is that A, everyone is neurodivergent, and B, everyone has mental illnesses. Goodbye.
Oh wow, yeah. I'm trying to decide how much I want to engage that, because I not like just for the sake of time. Like I'm like, man,
for sure.
Because I think about that a lot. Because it's like, wait, if everybody has divergence, yes, I don't think there's any debating that. Because I'm like, yeah, I mean, come on, like we're going like the normal has got to be like the mean or the average, and no one purely exists as an average. So yeah, divergent makes sense. But then illness, I'm always like, well, what is that? I mean, everyone I guess could catch mental colds, but then I guess it's a matter of degrees of illness. Is that like a fair? How much do you agree or disagree with that?
I really think that everything literally is a spectrum. Like it's literally health. You know what I mean? It's not like you're gonna find people that, well, okay, that's not true because I was one of them. I was just gonna say there's plenty of people that don't go to the doctor, but that doesn't mean that they're not sick. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then you and I definitely agree. Yeah. It's it can look different for different people, but yes,
Yeah.
I would say everyone is going to have things to work through in their mind, and habits that will help their mind and habits that will hurt it. And it will be different based on how they developed and yada yada yada.
Absolutely. And it's just a changing spectrum that is not linear. It's just like people, your mental health is going to be fluctuating and growing and changing. Hopefully just as you are changing as a person and taking on experiences into your life and learning from other people and hopefully doing some introspective work into yourself and going, okay, what wasn't great? What have people said to me? What can I take on? What have people said to me that I can also, kind of compare against my experiences? What can I work on? Just honestly engage yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to ask you about this because this is something I've had to think through. I don't particularly care for anti-theist or popular atheist or whatever most of the time, but some of them have called God delusional, obviously most famously Richard Dawkins, or not called him delusional, but rather believing in God is delusional. In what ways are they right, and in what ways are they wrong?
Hey, I hope your audience isn't going to hate me for continually saying it's really up into interpretation for everyone, because
well, yeah,
because what is delusion?
Well, delusion, I would it would have to be. Yeah, I mean that is kind of the tricky thing. It's usually it's similar. It's basically like a hallucination you don't see. Is that like what a delusion is? Is that? I'll look it up, but
sure,
that's
yeah.
kind of how I perceive it, at least.
Well, and then the other open question is, what does God mean to that person? Because God doesn't, God
Right.
isn't, a spiritual sky daddy for everyone. I don't mean to sound condescending.
Right.
That's perfectly legitimate if that is someone's experience, but just, you have to figure out the narrative that you're working with first.
Okay, here we go. Delusion. I think this might help our conversation. The first definition that just popped up if you Google it is an idiosyncratic belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted as reality or rational argument. And then parentheses, symptom of a mental disorder.
But I just don't think that you can prove or disprove whether or not there is a God. And because you can't argue with what God is for individual people. You know what I mean? So if you can't prove or disprove different interpretations, then how are you going to say what is and isn't delusional?
Yeah, I think you and I actually agree on this too. Imagine that. Because
crazy.
Yeah, I this is part of what I don't like about popular atheist arguments is I'm like, you're just talking like people are like stupid believing in fairy tales. I'm like, It's way more like ingrained than that. Now, are there some delusional Christians? Yes. Do Christians do delusional things? I think so. But it's probably not best to categorize. My personal opinion, my hot take of the day is I think that the way to approach people who are part of a cult, which is what I think Christianity is to not actually engage them on whether their beliefs are the problem, but actually to go, not like their belief system is the problem, but to actually go through specifics of circumstances. So for example, most people who leave Christianity either leave for A, academic reasons, or B, behavior reasons. It's usually like, I couldn't resolve this theology in my head. It didn't make sense. Or I saw this behavior and it became too much. I'm on the behavior side of things. I saw too much bad behavior and then I worked my way back to the academic. It can go the other way too. The only reason I think that's worth talking about when it comes to mental health is I don't think it's smart to view Christians as necessarily mentally unwell, but in like a stigmatized way, but more to be like, well, what is their general mental health as a person, rather than like focusing so much on the ideology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it actually makes a lot of sense. Because as I'm, positive that you also did, went through many growing pains of grief and anger and resentment leaving the church. It was hard for me in a lot of ways, and then also felt good to feel like it was easy to throw it away. You know what I mean? On one hand, I took my faith so seriously that I would remove my shoes in the sanctuary, and I grieved when I felt like I lost my spirituality. But on the other hand, it would also be easy for me to be like, "Fuck those Christians. They're incredibly painful. They caused me so much harm." Um, but as I've come to understand what Christianity and what religion means to so many different people, I understand that that's not everyone's experience, and it doesn't have to be, and it really needs to be more situation based of what does your faith mean to you, and what is your faith in God telling you to do as far as trusting or not trusting your mental health, or um, you know, how sinful is it to put yourself as a priority if you are trying to be healthy and be around other people? Because it's just not different from the rest of your body.
Like, what would you say to someone who is like recovering from religion, who doesn't want therapy or want to
hmm
read about mental health because like the whole ordeal just seems exhausting and overcomplicated? Like, what's your response to that?
Mm-hmm. Um, I really just want to inquire more as far as why it's exhausting to that particular person. You know, does it, do they feel like um they they can never achieve mental health? Is it because they feel that spirituality is out of reach if they want to also have mental health? Is it because they feel so abandoned by their spiritual support system and their spiritual leader, that they feel like they can't themselves be a spiritual
You're
person?
therapizing. You're therapizing.
I'm
Like I
sorry.
feel like
Yeah.
no, just I think it's great. I think you're asking all the right
But
questions.
like, I
I
don't want
just
to
like
ask the questions. I just want that person to ask themselves these questions. I don't need to know.
right,
Like, I don't
right,
ever
right.
need to know. I just think that it's important for someone to just start just inquiring why. Just, well, why is it that I have this aversion? Like, what if, what does this mean for me? Like, you don't have to tell someone else about it because it doesn't involve someone else. It's about you. Not you, John. Just you, this
Right.
theoretical person that is uncovering yourself, because you're not. I think it's going to be really difficult to achieve health in any aspect if you don't look at the root causes and the root symptoms, literally. Like, okay, here's what I'm noticing. Why might this be? Like, what am I noticing about this? And then
Yeah.
start from there, because you're not going to achieve anything unless you ask yourself your questions about what am I noticing here.
It is interesting that Christian cults make fun of the secular world for giving instant gratification when ironically they train their own to have a mindset of instant gratification when it comes to getting things. In other words, as soon as you become a Christian, you're supposedly healed or at least on a journey to healing. Actual mental health is not the same process, right? And I think that and this is not to shame anyone, of course, but I can speak to my case. I saw a relationship coach on my way out of my marriage and what turned out to be on my way out of faith. And I was definitely doing a flirtatious dance with alcoholism. And I think honestly, like the idea of sitting in a room and talking to someone was just like it made me want to vomit. So like even engaging on why I wouldn't want to do that was like, no, that's the same thing. I don't want to ask why. And I think there's space for that, right? I was grieving, I was going through a process, and now obviously I've come a long way from there.
Yeah.
Um but I think some of the things that might have been said to me that helped were were this were really that like I had value and that things couldn't hurt. I think that was one of the things that really helped, was to understand like what's the what play out your worst case scenario, you know? Like you go to a therapy session, you don't like it, you never go back. Okay, not so bad, right? And it kind of like it, maybe I was scared I would be joining a different kind of cult. Maybe I was scared because, you know, there were the seeds of doubt planted about psychology in general. You know, who knows what it was. But I think that that was the best thing that people did for me, was say like, listen, we're not going to make you do anything, but like it's not going to hurt you. Like, and just reassuring me that like the world out there is not trying to hurt me. I can do experiments, really experiments on myself with other people out in the world helping me, and it's a lot lower risk than I think the religious cult made me think it was.
Yeah, actually. I mean, that mindset is why I went back to school essentially. Because my professional background was in corporate accounting, specifically mortgage corporate accounting, and it didn't make me happy. You know, it wasn't. It was awful. And initially, I just ended up asking myself, you know, if I'm going to be around in however long it takes, you know, 4 years, 6 years, who cares? I may as well do something that is fulfilling. It's not going to hurt. You know, it's if it's not going to hurt, then literally, what is the harm? And also, it's my choice. You know, I have the autonomy to leave at any time if I feel uncomfortable or like it's not working. You can always change perspectives. You can always change how you're approaching a problem. And there's also not only one way to therapize, you know? Um, I think that the idea that talking in a chair, or sitting in a chair and talking to someone is going to work for everyone is incredibly ableist. That's not going to work for everyone. A lot of people can't do that for a lot of reasons. So it's important to find what is going to help a person specifically be healthy. And it's okay if it's not sitting in a chair talking to someone about their deepest, darkest secrets. It's just, it's up to that person to grow and find what tools can I implement in my life to be as healthy as I want to be.
I so deeply agree with that. On so many levels. But I do want to ask, you know, for you with your own like dealing with you know, mental wellness, like what self-care and therapy has worked for you and what has not worked for you?
Um, well, for me specifically, talk therapy did end up being really helpful for a couple of reasons. A, by nature, I'm a very, very talkative person. I joke that I have the gift of gab. I could literally talk to anyone about anything. It's, yeah. So I need to talk. That's the most helpful form for me, is to talk things out. Whether that be literally a therapist or, you know, a bestie on the phone at 3 a.m., aka you sometimes. It's just,
Never.
it's just,
Never. That's never happened.
that's my mode of working things out. And that's just how I operate. I just sometimes will have insurance pay for part of it. Um, but I also really needed to be listened to and validated, because my own experience growing up is I wasn't allowed to tell my story. I wasn't allowed to tell my experience because it was wrong, or it made someone else look bad or feel, you know, certain kinds of shame or emotions about their own action. And I really needed someone to hear like the most ugliest things that I have thought of doing and say, that makes a lot of sense. You were trying to survive. And have me go, oh my gosh, really? Like that makes sense to someone. I'm not a monster. Like, oh, that's really cool. And then that kind of opens up the curiosity bit, as far as now that I've established that I am not a monster, I can be a little bit more curious into what that looks like and what was happening to me and why I felt the way that I did about what was happening to me.
yeah, it's so ironic, isn't it? Because it's like one of Christianity's selling points is it's like at some point this guy is going to accept you, faults and all, and then you go to like one therapy session and you're like, well, so does this guy. I mean, it's it's kind of shocking how like how it really preys on fear and vulnerability, because once you again take that step, yeah, one of the most I agree with you, like one of the most beneficial things for me when I have done therapy has been yeah, just like not being validated as not crazy for like things that I thought were so dark and horrible, like, and just being like, no, that makes sense how that happened. Like I've literally had a therapist once say to me, I don't say this to everyone and I'm not trying to be like ridiculous, but John, that's not a big deal. It makes sense that happened. Like,
Literally
and I
me
was
as a
like, because
therapist.
I was just beating myself up over this thing for years, almost a decade. And like, she was
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, that's really not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was like, I thought when you were preparing me for this, I thought it was going to be like way worse. Like, you know,
Yeah.
and keep in mind, audience, like, I don't necessarily disclose my whole personal life in public, but like, it's not like the thing I did wouldn't be considered a big deal by some, but to have someone who knows my life story and knows the build and has heard the thought process in an unfiltered way to also go, yeah, no, it makes sense, you know, and also here's the unhealthy parts in that. What are some plans we can do to kind of work on those unhealthy parts? It's just super refreshing, and it's better than anything evangelicalism ever gave me.
It's almost as though people are normal and redeemable. And you don't need to go to someone
Just
else to be
automatically.
and you don't need to go to
Yeah.
someone else to be cleaned and made redeemable.
Mm.
Shocking. Shit, like so
Preach.
shocking.
Preach. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it really is kind of mind-blowing when it's like, wait, the cult, I call it disease mongering, right? Like they created a problem so that their solution made sense, where there
Seriously,
wasn't necessarily a problem.
because just because you have flaws and have had mistakes doesn't mean that that's your end all be all state. You still have as much life left to live as you want. It's your choice whether or not you can grow from it or are going to grow from it. And guess what? If we're going to create this whole pocket group of shame that is convincing you that absolutely no one else is going to accept you with your flaws and all and offer you grace and forgiveness except for this one person, then of course we're not going to be addressing and fixing our problems and our mental illnesses and our issues. Like it's just creating this shameful, festering, big wound of just not helping each other.
Yup. I mean, it really is. It's like it's ass backwards, right? Like it's like if you actually want to work on your problems, like not talking about them won't help, and also only talking about them to someone who can't respond at all doesn't really help. And then also only assuming that the way you can be clean in any real metaphysical way is if you give lifelong servitude to a group of at first strangers, you know, and then eventually people who force yourself into your life. I mean, it's so dangerous, and obviously you and I are heartbroken by what the cult is capable, the number that on people's mental health that the cult can do.
Well, and another thing that I think it's important to touch on is that a lot of the autonomy that the cult takes away from, and honestly, it's pretty much all autonomy in my own experience, is the ability to choose your own support system and to choose the people that can know about your deepest spiritual flaws and errors, because it's so weird. It's like you're put between this rock and a hard spot of you must accept spiritual forgiveness and then tell your story to other people about how you have been forgiven and what Jesus has done for you, but then B, you also are put in the situation where you're surrounded by people that are going to shame you and hate you and make you feel like you are somehow different or wrong for being just like them.
Yeah, it's odd and obviously very destructive. You and I have talked about how we both have like really good memories, like scary good memories. And so for us, it's kind of easy, I guess, to recount the past. And I know a lot of those the others, what they tell me is that, like that, and also just science is, obviously like your brain a lot of times will block out memories if there's trauma and stuff. But you and I think, are probably more susceptible to reliving experiences. So I don't know, for people like us, should we try not to obsess about our past too much, or is it okay to engage with it?
I think you have to ask whether or not it is hindering your growth in your current life and engage with it that way. Because I think that it's really, really important to learn from yourself and learn from your past experiences. I mean, I know a lot more about, I've learned a lot about myself at 19 and 20 just in the last few months. And I think that it's always really important to be engaging with the linear timeline of your life and learning from that and learning from those experiences and why maybe some things happened. But it's also, I think, important to not obsess over it because ultimately you cannot change it. Things have already, it's already written down, it's already in the book. Like the experience is already there. Write it off. And, it's your choice whether or not you're going to learn from it. And if you don't learn from it, then it's not really productive. But if you can try to apply it to how you would like to be different or keep some of those things, then I think that's really helpful. But, constantly circling the drain of what if and why and woe it's me is never going to help you go forward and try to be different and have a different, better perspective and a better life.
I agree. One of the things, I'll be personally vulnerable. Like, one of the things I've noticed about me is it feels like, I know this, it sounds, it's that this is just therapy. This is like something I would say to a therapist, is like, it feels like it takes me like 9 to 10 years to get over something. Like, it really does. Like, when I analyze when something happened, when I finally like accepted it and forgave myself, maybe asterisk, like, it takes me so long, and I feel like comparison never helps, right? But sometimes I'll be like, man, I feel like all my friends are able to just get over things so much quicker than I am. That's a problem for me, especially when it comes to like the funny thing is, Christianity is a little bit of an exception to that rule, because it has not been 10 years since I left the cult, but it has been well over 10 years since I started questioning whether I was in a cult. So I think I was so ready to to leave that when I did leave, it was like, oh, I know exactly why I'm leaving. But yeah, it takes me a long time to get over stuff, and so I don't know why I felt like bringing that up, but I think it can apply to people who are scared to leave things or scared to do something new, because they're like, it's gonna take me so long to get over this, which ironically makes just puts it off longer.
No, I'm actually glad that you brought it up, because I was just going to say that there really should not be, there really shouldn't be this expectation put on people growing and learning and grieving. It quite literally took me over a year for me to grieve that my brother had passed away. It just hadn't sunk in. And our mother said that I was not honoring God with the way that I was grieving because I wasn't grieving yet. It hadn't, that wasn't my process. But I think that it's impossible to, it's just impossible to grow from something if you're not there yet. You can't force growth. You can't force a mindset. So if you're not ready to process something or not, if you're not processing something or not growing from something, that means you're not ready and you might process it later. There's a really awesome writer that I got to read last quarter that I really wish I could remember her name right now, but she was speaking to having to learn as an instructor to to be satisfied with her students not immediately benefiting from what they were learning. Because later, sometimes they would come to her and say, you know, this really wasn't for me at the time, but, you know, this actually really helped me out now. And that's because it was when, you know, their minds were ready for it. It's when their lives were ready for it. It was applicable to their lives. It was applicable to their growth. And I just really don't understand why all this pressure on learning on a certain timeline and growing and healing on a certain timeline has been created. It makes no sense.
I can identify two sources. I think one is definitely like the cult, like we've talked about, kind of conditions you to expect like fast results, basically like sign up now. Okay, you're a Christian. Now do all this. Wait, you didn't do that. Confess it. Okay, be before the church. Confess your sin. All right, here's your rebuke and move on. Like that's kind of the process there. I also think just generally in society, like the internet age has just like rewired our brains to be so fast when like out here in the real world where, you know, we can actually see each other and touch each other. Like humans aren't supposed to go as fast as computers. Like that's not how we work. And so I think that might be two sources of why we want to grow quickly or get healthier mentally quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that the desire to grow quickly isn't valid. It's just it's not always attainable, and it's just not your fault. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, I grew up on a farm, so my metaphor is seasons. You know, you can't plant seeds out of season. It's just not, they're not going to grow. You're literally just going to be wasting your seed. You know, like you have to, you know, it's okay that it's not always the time to grow.
Wow, that analogy makes me happy because I just saw the first sprouts in my garden today. So I'm like, yeah, and I planted them like in November? No, earlier than that. So
see, and then where were you in November? You know, I'm sure that you were going through I'm sure you were going through stuff in November.
Oh gosh.
Exactly.
Yeah, my
you know
mind
what I mean?
was not great in November. Yeah.
Mine wasn't either. Yeah, like honestly, mine wasn't either. But so like literally you planted those seeds in November. A lot has happened and a lot of time, space, and growth has happened, and now your plants are coming up because it is literally the season for them to be coming up. Like growth should not be on a timeline.
I agree. And like, yeah, it's that yeah, it's not always methodical either, right? Because I always tell people a lot of change can happen in a short amount of time. You know, it can be kind of crazy. Like I think about like, let's see, how old am I? I'm 27. So like, yeah, 5 years ago, I was like, I'm going to be a pastor someday. 5 years, like in the scheme of my life. I mean, that's, you know, only like 20% of it or whatever. So that's, you know, it's like, it's interesting that like, yeah, you have to give yourself, you have to be able to accept that your change is not going to look like super step by step. Usually it's kind of going to go all over the place a lot of the time.
5 years ago, I was literally just trying to survive. Like literally, I had no other goal. So yeah, it's just like seriously, fuck timelines. Like they don't matter. Time is not real. I don't know why anyone won't listen to me.
Well, I'll advocate that people should just listen to you about all things at all times.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's my advocacy. Yeah, I've said before you should just be dictator of the world, and you've been like, I don't want that.
I just don't want that responsibility. You know, like how often,
yeah.
John, how often do you think dictators get to take naps? Like, honestly.
I love that that's your like biggest concern. It's like, but nap time though.
Think about it. Tell me a dictator that you think takes naps right now.
Well, you know, certain dictators probably have that like I just pigged out nap every now and then. Like, you know what I mean? Like they probably eat like a lot of gross food and then just kind of pass out sitting up in their chair. Like,
but that's all of us.
That's probably like sure, but they do. I don't know. I was trying to think of when they would nap, and I was like, there's got to be an answer to this. This is why you don't ask hypotheticals to me. I'm like, hold on, let me consider this.
I'm just trying to end on a good note, John.
Yeah, well, that doesn't. No, we can't do that.
I've got some halibut to eat. I don't know about you.
we can definitely start to wrap things up.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Let's keep going.
Okay. Well, I don't have much more. I guess when it comes to, I don't know, how you see your journey, do you see it in terms of like, I don't know. I guess it's like how I'll ask it more general and go whichever way you want with it. How do you perceive your own mental health journey?
It's not over. I don't think it will ever be over. And that's because I am literally never going to stop learning and growing because it's a choice that I'm making. I'm going to be engaging in my life and in my growth. I am at a significantly better place than I used to be. Um, and I have experienced depression in different ways than I do now. But it's still there. It's just a matter of I have the tools to cope with it, and I have the tools to understand that it is seasonal and it's not going to last forever. I just feel like I'm more well equipped to live with myself, literally. It's not about changing yourself or being in, recovery necessarily. Because I think that, your whole life is recovery because your whole life is growing, right? I just feel like I have more tools and more muscle that I have practiced to, live with myself and to encounter struggles that I deal with in different circumstances that come up that I don't expect. I handle things a lot better than I would have a few years ago. So, and I really hope that in the future I handle things better than I do now. Um, but I
Yeah.
understand that it's not. I can't rush that because I have to grow first. I have to just put the time in, and that's okay because I'm planning on being around for a while.
I'm glad you're planning on being around for a while. This might be too big a question to open towards the end, but it might be on some people's mind just as far as mental health and Christianity are related. I have a great amount of difficulty and have my whole life, both when I was a Christian and when I was not, just coping and just grieving. I mean, you can just call it grieving, just like with death, right? And Christians have sometimes been accused, I don't think this is an accurate accusation, but have been accused of believing in this because they can't cope with death. They need to know that there's an afterlife where they'll see their friends again or whatever. I think that's way too simplistic. I think there's a lot more going on when it comes to Christianity, but I don't know. How do you struggle with that too, or have you gotten to a pretty good place of acceptance? Because I frankly cannot handle death well at all, and I wonder how much of that was contributed, how much of that was from the cult, and how much is just my own personality and my own mental illnesses.
No, that's a really super valid question. Because yeah, existential dread is definitely something that I struggle with off and on. It really just kind of depends on where my mental state is at really at that particular day. Ultimately giving like the best, most helpful positive answer is that it was helpful for me to try and delve a little bit into what I think that spirituality is, and what that could look like when you die. So, um, you know, I think that literally people are energetic, that people have literal spiritual energetic, and you and I have talked ad nauseum about this. But just for the others, but just that it
For the others.
yeah, it makes sense to me that if there is energy that is active, it's impossible for energy to just completely dissipate. And so I have found kind of maybe comfort and maybe realism, maybe a combination of the two, um, to I guess think about myself continuing on into another existence. And a lot of people call that I'm struggling with the word with that others call it.
Reincarnation.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's It's interesting. I don't know that I would say, yes, I believe in reincarnation, because I think a lot of people have kind of, interesting takes on that. Like, I think that I'm going to be like a goat specifically, or a cat, or whatever. I think personally, I would love to be a cat. But
Right. I was thinking the same thing.
but it makes sense to me that energy can continue on, and that energy is, for me, is meaning spirituality. And I understand that that doesn't make sense to everybody, and I obviously that might change for me later on. But I really just think that it's important for people, when they feel like they can, to just think about, what do I think exists for me spiritually? Like, what am I spiritually? What do I exist within myself spiritually? And then, you know, use what resources feel comfortable to you. Use your use your discernment, so to speak. Like, look, there's all kinds of books, podcasts, people out there to talk to each other. What do we think? I really don't have a definite answer. I just have like a theory that makes sense to me. But I think it's important that we talk to each other, and that we, again, just like mental health, destigmatize the idea of dying, because it happens to everyone. It's literally a part of the human experience.
Yeah. I'm going to cry about some stuff real quick, and then we'll wrap up. So,
if you have some resources, I have plenty. Or if you want some resources, I have plenty. Positive death experiences.
You can always send me them.
Oh, actually, no, really. If people want to look up, her page is called The Good Death. And if you're quicker on your phone than I am, maybe you can look up her actual name. But she has written some fantastic books. I think she's a mortician. She's all kinds of things, but that's been personally very helpful for me, is The Good Death. And I think she also wrote a children's book called Will My Cats Eat My Eyeballs, and other questions about death.
Nice.
Yeah.
See, those are the fun kind of questions. Just quickly, I did want to say, like, in my own journey of like coping with like death and stuff, I will say, it's definitely not linear. It's an up and down thing, but there's if you're not into the energy stuff, I am, but if you're not into that stuff, you can also look at it as like, what was their legacy? And like, people I've lost, I think about their legacy and how lucky I am to have gotten to participate in it and learn from their legacy. I think can be a really healing thing. That's all I wanted to say, and if I say more, I'll cry a lot. So, yeah. Before we sign off here, Lily, is there anything else you wanted to say on this topic, or anything else before we get out of here?
Yeah, always. Like, I mean, not really, but always.
Well, I'll yeah. So Good Death, and then is there any other good resources you'd recommend?
Not that I can think of. I'm really trying to think of like what's some good like existential. Oh, Caitlin Doughty. Caitlin Doughty is her name, and she's the founder of the Order of the Good Death and Clarity Funerals. Yeah, there's some good stuff going on there. And then I've also just learned a lot about energy for anyone that is curious from Jessica Lanyadoo. And if people go to her page, they're going to see that she is a medium. She has some psychic woo stuff, but I've just really learned a lot from her in general. She's just a really smart person, and I've learned a lot about energy from her.
Awesome. Lily, thank you so much for coming on. It's always fun to talk to you. It's also fun to record talking to you, and hopefully this benefits some people who might be struggling with their own mental health, either exiting, or still stuck in that damn cult.
Yeah, no, truly. And again, I just really don't want it to seem like an us and them situation to folks that, still are stuck in the cult, so to speak, or still are attending church in ways that are maybe beneficial to their mental health. I just really think that the human experience is so linear and so communal, and I really mean that. I really think that we all just need to be talking more to each other and learning more about each other, because how else are we going to get anywhere?
I couldn't agree more. Thanks again for coming on, and thank you, listener, for stopping by. If you wish to learn more about what's going on in my life, or wish to purchase my book, go to thecultofchristianity.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, please continue to listen, follow, share, and consider subscribing for additional content. For only $5 a month, you'll have access to 2 additional shows, Parsing Propaganda, where I review and critique Christian content, and Art, where we try some amateur religious trauma therapy. Every subscriber becomes a part of something bigger than this podcast as we endeavor to hold churches accountable, speak the truth boldly, and most importantly, love others despite our pain. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep love in your life, hope in your heart, and searching in your soul.